The rumor reached the cadets 3 days before she arrived. A human was coming to teach combat and survival. That was the whole announcement. No rank listed, no medals named, no record of victories printed on the board like every other instructor who had ever walked through the academy gates. Cadet Rowe read the notice twice and laughed. He was Volani, four-limbed, with a hard outer shell that could stop a standard blade without a scratch. He had trained since he was old enough to hold a weapon. A human instructor meant nothing to him. Humans were soft. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. No armor on their skin, no venom, no clothes. They bled from small cuts, and they broke in cold weather, and they lived such short lives that most species did not bother learning their names. He told Cadet Brix what he had read. Brix was Garathi, nearly twice the height of most species in the academy, with skin like compressed stone. He did not laugh. He just shrugged his enormous shoulders and went back to sharpening his training blade. That was the most dismissal Brix ever offered anything. The morning she arrived, the cadets were already seated. 12 of them in total, from 6 different species, all of them competitive, all of them certain they were close to the top of their class. She walked in, and none of them heard the door. That was the first thing Roe noticed. No sound. She did not stomp or clank or announce herself. She simply appeared at the front of the room, set a small worn pack on the desk, and stood there looking at them the way someone looks at a map before a long trip. She was not impressive to look at. Medium height for a human. Lean. A few scars on her forearms visible below her rolled sleeves. Her hair was pulled back, and she had the kind of eyes that did not move around the room nervously. They moved slowly and stopped on each cadet like she was reading a page. There was a blade on her hip. Not ceremonial. The handle was wrapped in old cloth, and the blade, when Ro caught a glimpse of the flat of it as she settled into place, was covered in small marks. Dozens of them, carved into the metal in uneven rows. She did not introduce herself with a title. She walked to the board and wrote 2 words. Savos. Then she turned around and said, "The first lesson started when I walked in. Tell me what you noticed." Silence. Ro said, not unkindly, but not kindly either, "You made no sound entering." "Good," she said. "What else?" Another cadet said, "You looked at each of us before speaking." "Good." She pointed at Brix. "You." Brix looked up slowly. "You kept your pack between yourself and the door." She nodded once. "Habit," she said. "I will tell you about that habit later in the course. Sit with it for now." She spent the first half of the session walking among the desks, asking each cadet one question. Not about their training records. Not about their species' strengths. She asked each of them about their homeworld, what the ground felt like, whether the air was wet or dry, what season they were born into. Most of them answered with confusion. Ro answered with irritation. He did not see the point. She listened to every answer the same way, fully, without looking away. When she reached Brix, she asked what the oldest battlefield on his planet was called. Brix paused. He actually thought about it. Then he said the name quietly in Garathi. She repeated it back without an accent error, which made Brix straighten slightly in his seat. Ro had seen enough. Halfway through the session, he stood up without being asked and said, "This is not combat training. When do we get to the actual work?" She looked at him, not annoyed, not amused. Level. "Sit down," she said. He did not sit down. He crossed his arms. He was a head taller than her, armored naturally, and had placed in the top 3 of every physical assessment that year. "I can learn more from another instructor," he said. She walked toward him. She walked slowly and did not stop until she was close. Then she moved once, something too quick and too small for the other cadets to clearly see, and rose on the floor with one arm pinned under her knee. She had not hurt him, but she had completely removed his ability to move without his permission. She held it for 2 seconds. Then she stood and offered her hand. He stared at it. Then he took it and stood up. "Sit down," she said again. He sat. She went back to the front of the room and continued the session without mentioning what had happened. At the end of class, Director Oren appeared in the doorway. He was Devari, slow-moving, ancient-looking, with 4 arms he kept folded across his chest when he was thinking. He had been running the academy for longer than most species in the room had existed as spacefaring civilizations. He saw Sarah. He saw the blade. He stopped walking and looked at it. Not casually. He looked at it the way someone looks at something they were not expecting to find. He crossed the room, asked quietly if he could see it, and she took it from her hip and handed it over. He turned it in his hands. He counted the marks. His expression did not shift, but something behind his eyes went very still. He handed it back. He said nothing. He left. Ro watched him go. He looked at the blade. He looked at Sarah's back as she packed up her worn bag. For the first time since the notice went up, the bet felt less certain. Director Oren did not go home that night, that he went to the archive instead. The archive occupied the lowest floor of the academy, deep enough underground that the temperature never changed. It smelled of compressed records and old light. Oren had been to this room thousands of times in his career. He had never once come to it at this hour, or for this reason that he pulled the human historical file and sat down with it. Most species files in the archive were organized by era. Discovery period. Expansion period. First contact. For most spacefaring species, those eras were spread across thousands of years with long stretches of relative peace between them. The human file did not organize well by era. Oren scrolled through it slowly. He was a patient reader, and he had lived long enough to understand that history takes time to absorb properly. But the human file pushed even his patience because it refused to slow down. There was no long, quiet period between events. No century where the entry simply read, trade expanded, minor disputes settled, population grew steadily. Every century was full. Every decade had multiple entries. Wars overlapping with other wars. Conflicts that started before the previous ones ended. And woven through all of it, like thread through cloth, were the other things. Schools built, music composed, languages written down for the first time, hospitals constructed, children born and named and raised in the same years that other humans were destroying everything they could reach. Oren had studied galactic history for 400 years. He had never seen anything like it. He cross-referenced the marks on Sarah's blade. It took him 2 hours. Most of the marks matched confirmed conflict zones from the past 30 years, engagements where human soldiers had been documented participants. 3 marks he could not match to any open record. Those were either classified by the human government or recent enough that the data had not yet reached the archive. He sent a short message to the Galactic Military Council before he left that IT said, "Please confirm total documented combat engagements for human instructor Sarah Voss, currently assigned to this academy." The reply came back in 20 minutes. Confirmed and verified engagements, 31. Estimated actual total based on deployment records, higher. Full file is restricted level 4. Oren sat with that for a while. 31 confirmed. Higher suspected. And she had walked into a room of 12 heavily armed cadets from multiple species and stood at the front of it with the calm of someone who had nowhere more comfortable to be. He thought about the way she had moved when Rose stood up. Not aggressive. Not even particularly fast by the standards of most species in the room, but completely without hesitation. Like someone who had run the calculation 1,000 times before and already knew the answer before the question finished forming. He did not sleep well. Across the academy, Ro was also awake. He had not planned to look anything up. He had gone back to his quarters, eaten, and tried to read through his standard course materials. But his eyes kept going back to the moment in the classroom. The way Oren had held the blade. The way his 4 hands, which never moved quickly, had gone still. Ro pulled up the Public Human History Index on his datapad. Not the military file. The general one. The kind any student could access. He started reading. He read for 3 hours. He did not find what he expected, which was a short file about a minor species with a violent past who had recently reached space. He found something that did not fit neatly into any category he had learned in his civilization studies course. The scale of it was the first shock, not the violence. He had read about species with violent histories before. The shock was that it never stopped, and the species survived anyway. Over and over and over. Civilizations destroyed and rebuilt. Languages lost and recovered. Entire generations of humans who had grown up knowing nothing but conflict and had still somehow produced the next generation, which built things again. The second shock was smaller, but sat with him longer. It was a detail in a sub-entry about one of the larger human wars, a global one from several centuries ago. The entry noted that in the middle of the conflict, in a city that was being bombed regularly, humans had continued operating a public library. People had walked through rubble to borrow books. Roe read that twice. He could not tell if it was the bravest thing he had ever heard or the strangest. He put the datapad down and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the way Sarah had listened to each cadet talk about their homeworld. The full attention she had given to every answer, even the short ones, even the ones from cadets who had looked at her with open disrespect. He thought about the way she had helped him off the floor. He did not understand humans yet. But for the first time, he admitted to himself, in the quiet of his room, that he had been wrong to assume there was nothing to understand. He picked the datapad back up. He kept reading. There were no chairs in the second session. The cadets arrived to find the classroom empty. No desks, no boards. Sarah was standing near the far wall with her arms crossed and a small supply pack at her feet. She pointed at the door behind them before anyone could ask a question. "Outside," she said. "Terrain Zone 4. Take only what you have on you." Terrain Zone 4 was the rough ground section at the edge of the academy grounds where the landscape had been left intentionally uneven. There were rock formations, patches of soft ground, a low ridge, and an area of dense brush that most cadets avoided during free training because it had no clear paths. Sarah led them there in silence, and then stopped at the edge of it. "You have 6 hours," she said. "The goal is simple. Do not get hurt. Stay functional. Use what is around you." A cadet named Yessa, Solari species with sharp hearing and poor temperature regulation, raised her hand. "What are the parameters? What counts as completing the exercise?" "Being in one piece at the end," Sarah said. She sat down on a flat rock with her pack and said nothing more. For the first hour, most of the cadets performed reasonably well by relying on their natural advantages. The Garathi cadets, including Bricks, moved through rough ground easily, their dense skin protecting them from scrapes and sharp edges. The cadets with better vision scanned for resources without trouble, but Sarah had not chosen Terrain Zone 4 by accident. It had two features that none of the cadets had accounted for. The first was that the ground near the ridge was soft and unstable in ways that were not visible from above. 3 cadets sank up to mid-limb before learning to read the surface properly. The second was weather. The Academy's terrain zones had environmental controls that could be adjusted. Around the second hour, the temperature dropped sharply and a light rain began to fall. Yessa immediately began to struggle. Cold rain hit her temperature regulation hard, which was a known weakness of the Solari species. She moved toward the ridge to find shelter and found none. Sarah watched. She did not move. Brick saw Yessa's condition and moved toward her instinctively, using his large frame to block the wind. It was a good instinct. Sarah nodded once to herself. Roe had separated from the group in the first 30 minutes. He had decided, privately, that doing the exercise alone would prove something. He was not entirely sure what it would prove, but it felt important to be why the third hour, with the rain steady and the temperature still falling, he had made 2 structural errors. He had chosen a rest spot near the unstable ground, not knowing what it was. He had also not carried enough to improvise shelter from. His outer shell handled cold reasonably well, but prolonged wet conditions affected his joint mobility, a fact he had never needed to account for, because he had never trained in sustained rainfall before. But he was sitting behind a rock when the joint stiffness reached a level that made moving uncomfortable. He did not call out. He would rather stay in place for the rest of the exercise than say anything. Sarah appeared from the brush to his left without sound. She looked at him once, looked at his joints, and crouched down. She picked up 2 long sticks from the ground nearby, pulled a strip of fabric from her pack, folded it in a specific way, and built a small lean-to against the rock face. It took less than 4 minutes. Then she showed him how to position himself so that his core temperature would stop dropping. Roe washed her hands the whole time. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. She kept working. "I don't remember the name of the place." "What do you mean?" "I mean, most places I learn things do not have good names." She tested the lean-to for stability, or the name was not one that got written down anywhere. She stood up. She looked at him once more to make sure he was positioned right. Then she turned to go. "You knew I was here," Rose said. "Yes." "You were watching the whole time." "Yes." "Why did you wait so long?" She paused. She turned back halfway. "Because you did not need me sooner than this. Struggling is the lesson. I am here for the part that crosses from struggle into damage. You had not crossed it yet." She walked back into the brush. Rose sat with that for a while. The rain came down. The lean-to held. When the 6 hours were finished and the cadets gathered back at the edge of the terrain zone, Sarah walked among them briefly, checking for actual injuries. There were none. Several cadets were muddy and tired and mildly humbled. Briggs had a shallow scrape on one forearm that he had already stopped caring about. Sarah looked the group over and said only this: "You all made decisions. Some of them were wrong. Now you know which ones. That is the exercise." She picked up her pack and started back toward the academy building. Behind her, Briggs looked at Ro and asked quietly what had happened to him near the ridge. Ro told him. He told the story plainly, without shrinking it or adding to it. Briggs listened. Then he said quietly, "She came and found you." "Yes," Rose said. Briggs looked at the back of Sarah's figure walking ahead of them. He did not say anything else. But that evening, without telling anyone, he went looking for Leno, a junior academy staff member known for being good at research. He had a question he wanted answered. He just did not yet know how to ask it properly. Leno had not expected company. He was a junior records officer, Ferrethy species, small and quick-eyed with pale gray skin, responsible for maintaining the Academy's student files and equipment logs. Nobody came to see Leno after hours unless they had lost their access card or needed a form signed at SO. When Briggs knocked on his office door that evening, Leno opened it slowly. Briggs did not fit comfortably in the doorway. He had to angle himself to enter. He sat in the one chair that could hold his weight and said, without any opening conversation, "I want to know about the human instructor. The real information. Not the welcome file." Leno thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Come back tomorrow evening with the others." Briggs looked at him. "What others?" "The ones who are going to ask me the same thing by morning," Leno said. "I know how this goes." He was right. By the next evening, 7 of the 12 cadets had either asked Leno directly or sent a message asking if it was true he had pulled the human historical records. Ro had said nothing, but showed up anyway and stood near the back of Leno's small office without explaining himself. Leno had prepared. He had printed nothing. He had put everything on a wall display and organized it himself, which had taken him most of the day, not because the information was hard to find, but because it was hard to shape into something that could be shown to a room in one sitting. He started with a number. Approximately 10,000 years of documented human conflict, he said. Continuous. No significant unbroken peace period longer than 112 years in the entire recorded history before space contact. He let that sit. Then he put up the second image. It was a chart. The chart showed conflict intensity over human centuries alongside something else. Cultural output. New languages codified. Universities founded. Scientific discoveries published. The two lines ran parallel. They did not cancel each other out. They existed at the same time, through the same centuries, produced by the same species. Yesus said, that is not possible. A species under sustained conflict cannot maintain cultural development at that rate. That is what the data shows, Leno said. Briggs stared at the chart for a long time. He said nothing. Leno moved to the next section. He had chosen 3 specific stories from human history to tell in full. He had chosen them not because they were the most dramatic, but because they showed something that the broad historical data could not. The first story was about a human soldier who had fought in one of the larger global wars. After the war ended, the soldier had returned to his home region, which had been destroyed, and spent the remainder of his life helping rebuild it. He had been offered positions elsewhere. He had declined all of them. He said the place needed people who remembered what it had looked like before. The second story was about a small group of humans during a different conflict who had maintained an underground school for children in a region under military occupation. They had continued running it for 4 years under active danger. Not one of the children who attended that school was harmed during those 4 years. The third story Leno had found by accident deep in a sub-archive, and it was the one that had made him sit still for a while before continuing that it was about a human medical worker during a war period who had treated injured soldiers from both sides of the conflict. When asked by a commanding officer to stop treating the opposing side, the worker had refused. The reason given in the record was short. It said, "They're also hurt." The room was quiet. Roe from the back said, "Are all of Sarah's marks from wars that are over?" Leno pulled up the cross-reference. He had already run it. Most of them. 3 or 4 appear to be recent or classified. Roe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is she still fighting?" "I do not know," Leno said. "The current deployment file is restricted." Nobody said anything for a while. The wall display stayed on the chart with the 2 parallel lines, conflict and culture running side by side through 1,000 years of human time. Brick spoke. His voice was low and carried the particular weight that Garathi voices had when they were not performing anything. "My people have a word for someone who survives a war and carries the memory of it. We consider them a specific kind of elder. We do not ask them to explain themselves." Leno looked at him. "What do you call them?" Brick said the Garathi word. It did not translate directly. The closest meaning in the common galactic tongue was something like, "one who kept the count." The meeting broke up quietly. No one talked much on the way out. That night, someone slid a folded note under Sarah's door. Nobody claimed to have written it. In the morning, Roe noticed it was gone from the hallway floor. When he passed Sarah in the corridor, her face showed nothing. But she gave him one small nod as she passed. He did not know what it meant exactly. But it felt like something had shifted quietly, without announcement, the way important things often do. The third session began like the first 2. No ceremony. Sarah arrived exactly on time, set her pack down, and looked at the cadets. They were all present, all seated. Roe noticed that even the 3 cadets who had been laziest about punctuality were already in their places when he arrived. He did not comment on it. Sarah began the session with a short exercise on reading terrain from a map. It was quiet work. She walked the room, looked over shoulders, made corrections without drawing attention to them. The session had been running for about 40 minutes when Roe put down his map. He did not stand up this time. He stayed seated. He said, "I want to ask you something directly." Sarah looked at him. "The blade," he said. "The marks. We want to know what they are." The room was very still. Several cadets who had been at Leno's meeting the night before glanced at each other. The ones who had not been there picked up quickly that something significant was happening. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer. The quiet of someone deciding how. She reached down and took the blade from her hip. She held it flat on both palms and walked slowly to the center of the room where everyone could see it. "One for each," she said. "Not enemies, not victories. One for each conflict I walked into and came back from." She turned it so the marks caught the light. They were not uniform. Some were deep and straight. Some were shallow and slightly crooked, as if carved under bad conditions or in low light or when her hands were not entirely steady. "I did not start the first one until I came back from my 3rd deployment," she said. "I did not know yet that I was going to keep going back. When I realized I went back and carved the first 3 from memory." "Why?" Yessa asked. Her voice was quiet. "Because I needed to know the number," Sarah said. "Not for pride, for honesty. There's a difference between carrying something and pretending it is not heavy. The marks are so I cannot pretend." She turned the blade over. The other side had no marks. Just old metal. Brick said the first one. "What was it?" Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I was 19. A regional conflict on my continent. It lasted 11 months. I was there for 9 of them." She paused. "I will not describe it, but I will tell you that I came back and I did not know how to be a person in a quiet place for a while. It took time." Nobody asked her to say more about that. "Why did you keep going back?" Roe asked. She looked at him. "Because the people I went with were still going. And the people behind us needed someone in front." "That is not a reason," Roe said, not challenging her, genuinely trying to understand. "It is the only reason that ever made sense to me," she said. "I'm not going to tell you it was logical. I am going to tell you it was true." She walked back to the front of the room and set the blade on the desk. "There is a word in my language," she said. "Witness." It means to see something and carry the memory of it so it is not lost. Every mark on this blade is me witnessing something I survived, so it does not get quietly forgotten. So I do not walk around as if it cost nothing. Yessa said quietly, "Does it help?" Sarah considered the question with real seriousness. "Some days," she said. "Some days it just reminds me how many days there were." The room stayed quiet. Then Bricks said the thing nobody else had said yet. He said it plainly, in his low voice, in the way Garathi said difficult things, without softening them or surrounding them with extra words. "Are you afraid of it?" he said. "Of war?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. Bricks seemed to sit differently after that, like something in him had relaxed. "Anyone who tells you they are not afraid of war," Sarah said to the whole room, "has not seen one properly. Fear is correct information. It tells you what is at stake. I'm not here to remove your fear. I am here to make sure your fear does not make your decisions for you." She looked around the room slowly. "You will all face things in your careers that are genuinely dangerous. Some of you already have. Fear will be present. The work is not to eliminate it. The work is to stay functional while it is there. That is what this course is for." She picked up her materials and moved back into the session as if the conversation had been a normal part of IT. The back of the room. In the doorway, Director Oren stood without anyone noticing him. He had come to check on a scheduling matter. He had stopped when he heard Rose's question that he listened to all of it. When Sarah finished speaking and turned back to the room, Oren stepped away from the doorway and walked slowly down the corridor. He had governed this academy for a very long time. He had seen hundreds of instructors come through. He had never once heard a soldier answer that question the way she had. He had a letter to write to the Galactic Council. He began composing it in his head before he reached his office. On the last day of the week, the cadets did something that had not been planned. Sarah arrived at the classroom to find them already seated, which was expected by now. What was not expected was the objects on the desks. Each cadet had placed something in front of them. Small things. Nothing dramatic, but deliberate. Ro had a carved stone token. Dark green, polished smooth, with a simple mark on one side. He did not say immediately what it was. Yessa had a small folded cloth in the traditional Solari pattern for memory, the kind given to someone when they went somewhere difficult. Bricks had a fragment of dark mineral from his homeworld, heavy enough that it made a sound when he set it on the desk. He had it sent from home overnight. Leno had helped with the logistics without asking why. The others had brought what they had. A press leaf from a homeworld plant, a small written card, a hand-drawn symbol. One cadet, who had said almost nothing all week, had placed a single smooth stone that he had picked up from Terrain Zone 4 during the survival exercise. Sarah stood at the front of the room and looked at all of it for a moment. She did not ask for explanation. She nodded once at the room and said, "Thank you." Then she gave the last lesson. She did not use notes. She spoke without decoration, in words that did the work without extra weight. "The galaxy has been watching humanity for 200 years, she said. The first thing it saw was the violence. That part is not wrong. Humans fight. We fight each other, and we fight what threatens us. And sometimes we fight out of fear, and sometimes out of greed, and sometimes for reasons that do not hold up well under examination." She paused. What the galaxy missed was the other part. It missed it because the other part is quieter. It does not show up as easily in records. She walked slowly as she spoke. In the same centuries that humans were destroying things, they were building libraries and staffing them during bombings. They were writing music in prison camps. They were running schools in occupied cities. They were treating the wounded from both sides of the same war. Not because they were ordered to, because someone looked at another person who was hurt and could not look away. She stopped walking. Humanity is not special because it survives conflict. Many species survive conflict. Humanity is unusual because it refuses to let conflict be the whole story. There is always, somewhere in the middle of the worst of it, someone writing a letter home, someone keeping a school open, someone carrying a body back so the family has something to bury. She looked at the blade on her hip. She did not take it out. Every mark on this blade is a war. But every mark is also everything that happened alongside that war. Every meal I ate with people I was protecting. Every conversation in the dark between people who were scared. Every time someone made a joke in a bad situation because the alternative was worse. I carry the wars. I also carry all of that. Ro picked up the carved stone token from his desk. He stood and walked forward and placed it on her desk without being asked. He said, in Valani, a short phrase. Then he translated it. For those who endure, he said. He went back to his seat. Brick stood next. He placed the mineral fragment. He did not say anything in Garathi. He just set it down and returned to his seat. And that was enough. The others came forward one at a time. The small written card, the leaf, the symbol, the stone from Terrain Zone 4. Each one placed with care, without theater. Sarah stood and received each one. Her face did not perform anything, but she looked at every cadet as they placed their offering fully, the same way she had looked at them on the first day when they told her about their homeworlds. When the last one was placed, she stood with the objects in front of her for a moment. Then she packed them carefully into her worn bag, each one, with the same attention she gave to everything. She looked at the room. You are going to be good at this, she said. Not because of what you are made of, because of what you chose to pay attention to. She picked up her bag and her blade and walked to the door. Director Oren submitted his report to the Galactic Council that evening. The subject line read, recommend expanding human instructor program, immediate priority. He had written 3 drafts. The final one was the shortest. It said what he needed to say without requiring the council to ask follow-up questions. The vote came back the next morning. It was unanimous. It was the fastest vote the Academy Expansion Committee had recorded in its 400-year history. The note from the council lead said only, we read the classroom report. We understand. In her quarters, Sarah opened her bag and lined the objects up on the shelf above her bunk. The stone token, the folded cloth, the mineral fragment, all of them in a row. She looked at them for a while. Then she sat down and wrote a short letter to someone back home. She did not describe the week. She just said it had been a good one, that she had met people worth knowing. She sealed it and set it with the others. The classroom, the report noted later, had fallen silent for a reason. Not from fear, not from confusion, from recognition. 12 cadets from 6 species had looked at one human and the count carved in her blade and understood, for the first time, what that number meant. Not what humanity had survived, what humanity had chosen to carry.